Doctor had spent 400 years studying primitive civilizations across the galaxy. She had watched the slow crawl of dozens of species as they discovered fire, invented wheels, and eventually looked up at the stars. The collective council paid her well for these observations. Her reports helped determine which species might one day join galactic society, and which ones would burn themselves out before reaching the stars. But she had never seen anything like the species on the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. The emergency meeting of the Galactic Development Council had been called 3 days ago. Representatives from over 200 spacefaring civilizations now filled the massive amphitheater on Station Prime. Stood at the central podium, her four arms trembling slightly as she prepared to deliver her findings. Behind her, a massive holographic display showed a small blue planet spinning slowly in the void. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice carrying across the silent chamber, "I must inform you that our standard models for civilization development are fundamentally broken. The species known as humans have done something that should be impossible according to every law of social evolution we have ever documented." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The ambassador, a massive crystalline being, leaned forward. "Explain yourself, researcher. Our models have predicted civilization trajectories for millions of years." Touched a control, and the display changed to show a timeline marked with colored indicators. This is the standard development pattern for a spacefaring civilization. The average time from basic tool use to space travel is approximately 300,000 years. The fastest recorded development before now was the collective at 180,000 years. The slowest was the dormant minds at nearly 2 million years. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. The humans achieved the same developmental milestone in approximately 10,000 years. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted in dozens of languages, some calling her a liar, others demanding to see her data. The council speaker had to activate the silence field 3 times before order was restored. "That is not possible," stated Ambassador flatly. "There must be an error in your observations. Perhaps they received outside assistance." "I considered that," replied. "I have spent the last 50 years investigating every possible explanation. There was no outside contact, no ancient artifacts from lost civilizations, no genetic modification by precursor species. These beings evolved on their own planet and developed entirely through their own efforts." She brought up another display showing detailed timelines. "Let me walk you through what we observed. 10,000 years ago, these creatures were living in small tribal groups, hunting animals with sharpened sticks. They had just discovered that seeds could be planted intentionally. They built structures from mud and straw." The display shifted forward. 5,000 years ago, they had developed writing, mathematics, organized governments, and sailing ships. They were already fighting wars with metal weapons and building structures that would stand for. Another shift. 2,000 years ago, they had created philosophy, complex legal systems, and engineering projects that still impress our analysts. They were already asking questions about the nature of existence and the structure of the universe. The display jumped again. 500 years ago, they invented the printing press and began spreading information at unprecedented speeds. Within decades, they had figured out that their planet orbited their star, not the other way around. They started building devices to see distant stars and tiny organisms. His voice grew more urgent. 200 years ago, they discovered how to harness electromagnetic forces. They built machines that could communicate across vast distances. They learned to fly through their atmosphere. They split the atom and unleashed nuclear power. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the most skeptical representatives were staring at the displays with growing unease. 50 years ago, they stepped onto their moon. 30 years ago, they connected their entire species through a global information network. 20 years ago, they began editing their own genetic code. 10 years ago, they created artificial minds that could learn and adapt. 5 years ago, they launched their first interstellar probe. She let the final image settle on the display. A small spacecraft, barely larger than a personal transport, heading toward the nearest star system. And yesterday, said quietly, they detected our observation platform and sent us a message asking who we were. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, the council speaker found her voice. How is this possible? What makes them different? Had anticipated this question. She had spent decades trying to answer it herself. I have identified several factors that seem to contribute to their accelerated development. None of them are unique to humans individually, but together they create something we have never encountered before. She brought up a new set of displays showing biological and social data. First, their individual are extremely short. The average human lives for approximately 80 of their planet's years. This seems like a disadvantage, but it creates intense pressure to accomplish things quickly. They do not have time for the leisurely contemplation that most species enjoy. They must act or die without having contributed anything. Second, their species is intensely competitive with itself. Unlike most civilizations that achieve stability through consensus, humans constantly fight among themselves. This seems destructive, and it often is. But it also drives innovation at incredible speeds. When one group develops a new weapon, their enemies must develop a counter or be destroyed. When one nation creates a new technology, others must match it or fall behind. This constant pressure pushes them forward, even when there is no external threat. Third, and perhaps most importantly, they have an unusual relationship with failure. Most species learn from their mistakes and then avoid similar situations. Humans do something different. They analyze their failures, extract useful information, and then deliberately attempt similar things again with modifications. They call this process experimentation. They have formalized it into something they call the scientific method. Paused to gather her thoughts. But there is something else, something I cannot fully explain with data. Humans possess a quality that I can only describe as irrational optimism. They believe they can accomplish impossible things, and then they frequently do. When they fail, they simply try again. When they succeed, they immediately look for something harder to attempt. Ambassador stirred uneasily. This sounds like a description of a dangerous species. Competitive, aggressive, unreasonable. Perhaps we should consider containment protocols. That was my initial recommendation as well, admitted. But further study has changed my assessment. Yes, humans can be violent and destructive. They have done terrible things to each other throughout their history, but they have also demonstrated remarkable capacity for cooperation and compassion. She displayed images of human achievements. They build hospitals to heal strangers. They create art that serves no survival purpose. They risk their own lives to save members of other species. They send resources to help populations on the other side of their planet. They adopt orphaned young from different genetic lines and raise them as their own. Most remarkably, she continued, they seem to be aware of their own flaws and actively work to overcome them. Each generation is slightly less violent, slightly more cooperative, slightly more capable of seeing past their tribal divisions. They are teaching themselves to be better. This is something we have never observed in any other primitive species. The council speaker raised a manipulator appendage. What are your recommendations, doctor? The researcher took a deep breath. I recommend that we initiate formal contact as soon as possible, not because we need them or because they might threaten us, but because I believe they have something valuable to teach us. A ripple of surprise passed through the chamber. The ambassador, one of the oldest members of the council, spoke for the first time. What could a species of 10,000 years teach civilizations that have existed for millions? Smiled, a human gesture she had unconsciously adopted after years of observation. Speed, urgency, the willingness to risk everything on an unproven idea. We have become comfortable in our ancient civilizations. We measure progress in and feel satisfied with incremental improvements. We have forgotten what it means to dream of impossible things and then make them real. The humans reminded me of something I learned in my earliest studies and then forgot. The universe does not care how long a species has existed. It only rewards those who keep reaching for more. Humans have mastered this lesson in ways we never have. They are not content with what they have achieved. They are always hungry for the next challenge, the next discovery, the next horizon. She turned to face the full assembly. In our oldest records, there are legends of a hypothetical species that could cross the development threshold in a single generation. We called them the quickened. We believed they were impossible, a mathematical curiosity. The humans have proven that the quickened are real, and I believe that if we do not learn from them, they will eventually surpass us entirely. The debate that followed lasted for 17 days. Some representatives argued for isolation, believing that contact with such an unpredictable species was too risky. Others suggested observation from a distance, waiting to see if the humans would destroy themselves as so many fast-developing species had done before. A few even whispered about elimination, though this suggestion was quickly shouted down. In the end, the council voted for contact. The margin was narrow, but the decision was made. A delegation would be sent to meet the humans and begin the slow process of introducing them to galactic society. Doctor was chosen to lead the delegation. She accepted the assignment with a mixture of excitement and fear. She had studied humans from a distance for 50 years. Now she would finally meet them face to face. As she prepared for the journey, she reviewed her notes one final time. There was one observation she had not shared with the council. It seemed too personal, too unscientific to include in her official report. During her decades of study, she had watched millions of individual humans live and die. She had seen their triumphs and their failures, their cruelty and their kindness. And she had noticed something that troubled her deeply. Humans were not just fast, they were accelerating. Each generation accomplished more than the previous one. Their rate of development was not linear, it was exponential. The graph of human progress was a curve pointing almost straight up. If this pattern continued, within a few more centuries, humans might not just catch up to the elder civilizations. They might leave them behind entirely, reaching heights of achievement that the galaxy had never seen. Did not know whether to hope for this outcome or fear it, but she knew one thing with certainty. The galaxy would never be the same now that humans had arrived. The old order of slow, careful progress was ending. A new era was beginning. And it was going to be very, very fast. She boarded her ship and set course for the small blue planet. Behind her, the ancient civilizations of the galaxy watched and waited. Ahead of her, humanity reached for the stars with hands that had learned to use tools only yesterday. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in millions of years, it was exciting again.